Guys, it's Encrypted Maswell here with the well-awaited Inara guide, so without any further ado, let's get on into it. So to start things off, we're going to go through all of Inara's abilities as well as her ultimate. Inara's primary fire is called Stone Spear. Inara fires a burst of 3 projectiles dealing 225 damage each every 1 second. This weapon is a mid-range weapon, so that means it will have fall-off damage the further away you get from your target. Inara's next ability is called Earthen Guard. Inara enters a defensive state that lasts 5 seconds where you and your deployables take 30% reduced damage and you take 60% increased healing. Inara's R1 ability is called Warden's Field. Inara places a stone obelisk that pulses and slows enemies for 60% of their max movement speed, as well as deals 150 damage per second to all enemies within its radius. Inara's L1 ability is called Impasse. Inara deploys a wall that grows out of the ground and lasts for 5 seconds. There are 2 main ways to use Inara's Impasse. The first is to put the wall behind your enemies to block their escape. The second way is to put the wall in between you and your enemies to block any damage coming your way. Lastly, for Inara's ultimate, Seismic Crash, Inara throws her spear passing through shields and stunning any enemies within 40 units of its impact for 2 seconds and dealing 500 damage. Now that we've gone through all of Inara's abilities, we can move on to her legendary cards. Inara's first legendary card is called Mother's Grace. With this card, Earthen Guard gains 20% increased damage reduction and now grants 60% increased healing. The next card, Treacherous Ground, allows Warden's Field to cripple enemies and increases its radius by 50%. Inara's last legendary card, Tremors, reduces the cooldown of Impasse by 80% if it is not destroyed. Now that we have a good handle on all of Inara's abilities and legendary cards, we can move on to the loadout that I would recommend. To start the loadout off, we have Geomancer 2, which reduces the cooldown of Earthen Guard by 1 second. This just helps to give us increased damage reduction and healing more often. Next, we have Sacred Ground 4, which grants us 20% increased damage reduction while standing in Warden's Field. This allows Inara to be as tanky as possible at all times. To go with Sacred Ground, we have Standing Stones 2, which reduces the cooldown of Warden's Field by 2 seconds. This helps us to have increased damage reduction more of the time. Next, we have Steadfast 2, which increases our maximum health pool by 300, just to make us that little bit more tanky. Last, we have Stone Bulwark 2, which allows us to heal for 80 health per second while in Earthen Guard. This small amount of healing can really help in those crucial low health moments. Now that we've gone through all of the basics of Inara, we can move on to some of the more advanced strategies. First strategy we'll go over is when to use your Warden's Field and when to use your Earthen Guard. My preference is to use my Warden's Field as soon as I get to the point, so that I can get the 20% damage reduction as well as I slow and damage the enemies on the point. Once I reach about half health and my Warden's Field is gone, I like to use Mother's Grace to gain more damage reduction as well as get 60% increased healing to help counteract any cauterize that is applied to me. There are certain scenarios where this strategy is not the best, however. For instance, if the enemy team has a Drogos. We all know that a Drogos player's favorite thing to do is to salvo the point as soon as possible. What we don't want to happen is to have them destroy our Warden's Field by chance when they do this. So when the enemy team has a Drogos, there are really 2 options. You can either try to wait out the salvo, or you can use Earthen Guard first rather than Warden's Field. While we're on the topic of Drogos, let's talk about how to dodge his ultimate, as it is one of the most lethal things to Inara in this game. The first way to dodge a Drogos ultimate is to place a wall in between Drogos and yourself at the last moment, thus blocking his path to you. The second method involves you boosting yourself into the air by placing a wall underneath your feet. This method relies on you tricking your opponent, as most will think you are behind the wall rather than on top. Next, we'll talk about an alternate way to use Inara's ultimate. When Inara is using her ultimate from a long distance, the area of ground for her to hit is very slim and can result in you missing some of your targets. The alternate way to use Inara's ultimate is by boosting yourself into the air with a wall, putting you at a higher vantage point and thus giving you a bigger area of ground to hit. Now it's time to put everything that we've learned into action. Here I have an example Inara gameplay on Brightmarsh where we'll go through all of my thoughts and reasonings for my actions. For my legendary card choice, I would typically go for Tremors on Brightmarsh, as you can easily block the enemy's entrance, but for this game I was solo queued, so I went for Mother's Grace for the extra damage reduction just to be safe. I bought Cauterize so that anyone that I'm shooting has reduced healing from Saris. When I get to point, the first thing I do is use my Impasse to separate the enemy Torvald from his healer, as well as block any damage that's coming through the door. You'll notice I did place my Warden's Field a little late. If I had placed it earlier, I would have taken less damage and could have possibly kept the Torvald from retreating with the 60% slow. Now that I'm about half health, I used my Earthen Guard to take less damage and to get increased healing from my Saris. At this point I'm in survival mode, just trying to stay alive to contest the objective. While I'm on my way back, I noticed that my team's basically captured the objective, so I use my Impasse to wall off the Torvald and hopefully secure a kill. At this point, I see my Willow being attacked by a Skye, so I go back to try to help, but the Skye unfortunately does get away as she goes invisible. At this point, I notice that the fight's starting to go the enemy's way, so I use all my abilities to try to stall while my team respawns. Now that the enemies have 99% on the objective, we have to make a last-ditch effort to take the point. I use my Impasse to wall off the Torvald, and then I use my Earthen Guard to take increased damage reduction from the Sky Bomb. While I'm on my way back, I notice that my stalling on the point has allowed my team to have time to respawn and get some kills. By the time I get back to point, there's only a few kills left to clean up. I use my ultimate here to hopefully secure the last kill and be able to take the point. Unfortunately, I do lose track of the Skye in the smoke and then I'm killed by Kinessa. While I'm in the team fight, I always try to shoot the squishier targets first and then leave the tank for last. Fortunately, my Victor is able to secure some kills on some of the low health targets, helping us take the point. I use my Impasse here to block the entrance to the point, thus keeping any of the enemies from stalling the objective. Now that we've captured the point, I stay very close to the payload to make sure it's moving at all times. While coming back to the payload, I see a Leanne that's very low health and we are able to secure the kill. After killing the Kinessa as well, we now have 2 kills in our favor, so I try to play a little aggressive to keep the stagger going. Once again I use Earthen Guard here to take increased damage reduction from the Sky Bomb. Here I notice the enemy Leanne in our backline, so I try to secure the kill to keep the stagger going. Once again I play very close to the payload to make sure it's moving at all times, as well as protect my healer from any flankers like Skye. Now that my Willow's killed the Kinessa, we once again have a man advantage, so I start to play aggressive. I use my ult here to hopefully secure a kill and keep the fight in our favor. Unfortunately, I do lose track of the Skye in the smoke once again. After my failed ult attempt, I do get separated from my team and I'm easily killed by the Skye. On my way back to point, I notice that we're not going to be able to push in the payload this time around, so I stop and try to charge my ult by shooting the Torvald. Once the rest of the enemy team comes to help the Torvald, I do use my Impasse to prevent them from doing any damage and thus charging their ults as well. After the point fight, I do invest in Haven 3, as the Kness is giving me quite a bit of trouble and neither of my damage dealers are consistently taking her out. Once again, the first thing I do when I get to point is use my impasse to block the entrance so none of the enemy team can get to the point, as well as block any damage that's coming through the doorway. After attempting to ult my backline, the Torvald comes to point very weak, so I easily clean up the kill. With the Torvald dead, the enemy team has no real way to contest the objective, so I make sure to stand on point so we get free capture. I'm mostly just poking the low health targets and letting my damage dealers finish them off. While I'm on the objective, the enemy team is able to kill some of my backline characters, thus turning the fight in their favor. What I'm mostly trying to do here is stall so my team can come back off of respawns. Because the enemy Knessa is uncontested by either of my damage dealers, she is able to do a massive amount of damage and is able to kill my Victor. At this point, my ally Torvald has come back, so we have quite a bit of a hold on the objective. My main role as Inara is to win the point fight while I rely on my ally damage dealers to kill the enemy backline. After killing the enemy Skye, we do have a man advantage and should be able to kill the low health enemies fairly easy. The Seris does go invisible here, so I choose to ignore her and try to take out the enemy Leanne instead. Once the enemy Seris comes out of Ghost Walk, we are able to get her to low health and force her off the objective, allowing us to capture the point. At this point in the game, my main objective with my impasse walls is just to block the damage that's coming from Knessa. While fighting Torvald, I try to stay behind this building to stay out of Knessa's line of sight. The low health enemy Torvald is an easy kill and allows us to stagger the enemy team. With the enemy tank down, I do play a little more aggressive and try to kill some of the enemy backline. Here, while fighting the enemy Leanne, I attempt to trap her in the corner with my impasse, but I miss, thus allowing her to get away. I do lose my Willow to the enemy Skye here, making the team fight even with 4 alive on each side. Because we don't have a clear advantage, I play it safe and just push the payload as far as I can. With 3 of my teammates down, I retreat slightly while I wait for them to respawn. I notice the enemy Skye out of position. I'm almost able to kill her with the slow from my Warden's Field, but unfortunately she is able to get away by using her invisibility. At this point it's a 1v2, so I use my impasse to get out and avoid damage. Now that my team is back and I've healed up slightly, I decide to use my ult to try to get a couple kills and sway the team fight in our favor. After finally killing Skye, we do have a 2-man advantage and should be able to kill the remaining of the enemy team. At this point, we've successfully staggered the enemy team and continue to do so, thus allowing us to push in the payload. Here I attempt to block the Skye bomb with my impasse, but unfortunately the payload does destroy my wall and I do take the damage. After pushing in the payload, I do buy Rejuvenate 2 so I get increased healing from Seris, as well as Cauterize 2 to reduce the enemy team's healing. As always, I use my impasse to block the enemy's entrance, thus cutting off the Torvald from his team and blocking any damage coming through the doorway. I use my Warden's Field here to slow the enemy Torvald by 60% and keep him from retreating to his team. After a very good Seris ult, we're able to get the kills we need to turn the team fight in our favor. With the enemy tank dead, I once again stand on the objective to get free capture points. I use my impasse here to block any damage coming from Knessa. With my ally Victor going down, I decide to play it safe and stick by the rest of my team. Here I attempt to kill the enemy Torvald as he's the only one contesting the objective. With the enemy tank down, the Ceres goes into Ghost Walk to contest the objective. I put my impasse up here to trap the Liane in the point, thus securing the kill. With my Victor killing the enemy Ceres, there's no one left to contest the objective, and we're able to successfully capture the point and win the game. Thanks everyone for watching. Leave a comment down below on what you thought of the video and on what tank you want a guide on next. Make sure to stay tuned for new videos every Monday.